Welcome to the Human Side of Money, a show dedicated to equipping financial advisors with the skill set required to work with emotional human beings on the emotionally charged topic of money. You'll get practical tips and insights on applying behavioral finance into your practice from conversations with fellow advisors, industry consultants, and experts in the fields of behavior, psychology, communication, and more. Each episode is designed to help you enhance client outcomes and forever change the trajectory of your advisory business. Now here's your host, Brendan Frazier.
Kathi Balasek, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It is such a privilege to be here, and I'm excited for the conversation.
I actually had an advisor reach out to me probably 3, 4, 5 months ago, something like that. Time's funny these days. It's probably longer than that. And said, hey, you need to have somebody on that's an expert in talking people through tough times, grief, transitions. And I said, I know that I do. And I'm reaching out to Kathi immediately to make that happen. So, and you actually have a line or a quote, I think you said it, I will give you credit for it, that I heard, that I wrote down and thought was a really good way to sort of frame this whole thing. And that is, advisors are on the front line of bad news. Like it's literally part of the role that comes with the territory. Like it or not, there's no way around it. But in this job, our role is we're going to be on the front line receiving bad news. Oftentimes not later on, not months afterwards, but usually when it's most raw, most fresh, it's usually just happened. And so it's one of those things where we're on the front lines. You either choose to embrace it or you choose to run away from it. And we're going to talk about embracing it and how to do it. But before we do, I think it's important to, if you're up for it, to take us back on your journey that you went on that started 20 plus years ago, maybe before, that led you to this point where you're now helping people, helping advisors have these skills to develop the grief skills to get through these tough conversations.
Okay, yes. So, over 20 years ago, I was living the life, the fairy tale. And, I had a wonderful husband, 5 beautiful children, we both had great jobs, money in the bank, all of those things. And, he came home one day, he's an airline pilot for FedEx. And we found out he had a brain tumor. And literally, I went from being, that mom and doing everything and soccer mom and having fun to being a caregiver, and then on to being a widow before I was 40. And, faced with raising 5 kids on my own. And you learn about grief, you learn about grief support, grief counseling, and all the things that people say to you and all the things they shouldn't say to you. And, you're just trying to just get up every day. And it's been 20 years since his death. And the number one thing I've learned about grief through that is grief never ends. It's the end of a life, not the end of a relationship. And, the depth that you grieve is basically the depth of your love. And we live in this society that doesn't want to talk about it. And so we think you need to get over it, move on, and that path, I have moved forward. I have a wonderful relationship with a guy I love, and all these wonderful things have happened in my life in the last 20 years. But it doesn't change the fact that grief is forever, and we don't quite understand as a society of what grief is and how to treat it and how to really show up for people. So I knew at some point in my career, because I'm an educator, that I wanted to do something with my education and my experience. And I didn't know what that was, but I just started doing research because I'm kind of good at that. And I thought I need to find an industry that needs my help somewhere in the grief space. And I started looking at, and I saw a lot of data on conversations we're not having. Financial advisors are losing grieving clients, losing widows, and they're the one people that have skin in the game because money is walking out the door. And I thought, wow, I had a great financial advisor. He went above and beyond for us during the darkest days. And so fast forward, that's what I'm doing.
I've never felt more nervous to ask a question than I do right now, because you're literally the person that knows what to do or not to do in times of grief and how to take people through those conversations. And so I'm about to ask a question to the expert, and it feels like a little bit of a, I don't even know how to ask it, so I'm going to try. Feel free to use it as a way to critique. But right as you started the answer to my question, it looked like you were like already overcome with emotion and had some like tears in your eyes. It's been that long. Like, is that normal? Does that surprise you at all? I mean, I can't imagine. You must have talked about this so many times, and so I'm just kind of curious. Like, does that ever go away? Does it happen every time?
Great question, and thank you for the courage to have it.
Oh,
and
okay. Shoo.
Yes,
All right.
yes. I mean, most people wouldn't ask.
Okay.
Anybody who has experienced deep loss, typically it's unpredictable. But whenever I say my husband's name, John, which I love hearing his name, it never leaves. And I think so often people are afraid to mention it or ask you about it in fear that they'll bring it up. And yet the question you just gave me, I already trust you more because you asked it. And you allowed me to tell something of why, and we're so afraid that, oh gosh, I don't want to make it worse. I don't want to upset her. I don't want her to cry, or I don't want him to cry. But yet, why are we here? The human emotion of tears, sadness, depth of love and grief is a connection. And, it never leaves, because that time in my life, what am I supposed to do? Just erase that? It's right. Still memories. And when people, start telling, asking, we'll be in a group, they'll say, well, how did you meet your husband? How did you do this? Well, my story is going to make people sad because they know my husband is gone. And yet I'm so thankful that they asked, because now I get to be a part of the conversation too.
Yeah, it makes me think back to conversations that I've had where you ask somebody, if they're married, and they're like, yeah, it's my second marriage. And like, oh, okay. You get divorced the first time? No, my spouse passed away. And in that moment, you're like, I feel bad even saying this, but it's like, oh man, like I really wish that it didn't go there. I don't know how to handle this. And like, you do the best that you can with it, right? But it's like, what do I do with that, right? I don't know how to handle. Where do I go? Do they want to talk about it? Do they not? And so, in that moment, and I imagine that's a pretty common feeling. What would you say to somebody that's feeling that, both from maybe from like the coaching side, but also from like the receiving end of it? Because I have to imagine you've made a comment like that before to somebody, and you've probably heard the whole gamut of responses. Right. I'm sure you've heard it all.
Right. So there's a couple things that are helpful in those types of scenarios. First of all, when you don't know a person or you don't know a new client, asking things like, do you have kids or are you married? You're kind of opening up yourself to the whole sad story. You might do a lead in, your opener of tell me about your family. And then they can pick and choose what they want to tell. And at some some point when the trust is developed, they will share more. They will share more that they were divorced, or they lost a child, or they're a couple that, is experiencing infertility, or, but asking them right up front, do you have kids? Are you married? Shouldn't be your opener. And then another thing too is when they tell you, oh, I'm widowed or I'm this and that, okay, thank them. Thank you for telling me that. And you look at them and you thank them for telling you that. And saying things like, I don't know you very well, but I hope we'll start to learn more about each other, and that that I'd love to hear about your life and your whole life. And it really gives them a safe space, permission to share, etc. And the griever, they can create some boundaries too. I mean, I sometimes when I'm having my low days, I don't go certain places. Memory lane is closed, okay? Not going there. And I have to really create that boundary. So when somebody says, are you married? I'm like, yep. Well, what does he do? He's an airline pilot. And I'm a big fat fibber because I got to get through the day. I can't afford another grief spiral, because grievers will tell you that it's unpredictable some days. You could be standing in the grocery line and it just happens.
It hits you, yeah.
So part of grief work and the brilliance of grief psychologists and counselors is to help a griever, really know their triggers, know their times, their places, and really create some boundaries around that. You know that there's certain people that trigger you. There's certain places that trigger you. You have to be aware of those. I always would drive to family events after the death by myself. I would have an out because I couldn't be there. I could go and show up for an hour, but I could leave when I wanted. And so I think overall, the fear of saying something wrong is very normal. We all feel that way. I felt that way before I went through this and before I did the research and learned about a good bedside manner. We all feel this way. We were never taught the language of loss.
Right. Well, I imagine there are things that you could say wrong. So if the fear is not unjustified in a way, right? Like it's fair to feel a little bit fearful. There probably are things you can say wrong. Do you remember any times or things that people said where you just thought to yourself, wow, I can't believe they just said that?
Oh yeah. Yes. I'll give you a couple examples, and I don't take offense to it. I kind of get a chuckle out of it now. My sense of humor is something that got me through grief. So it's a part of me, but I remember many people saying to me like, oh, you're so young, you'll find somebody new. It's like, what am I going to do? Wait out on the courthouse lawn and wait for the next live one that comes out and I've got a husband? I mean, it's like, or they'd say to me like, thank God your kids are young. They really won't remember him. It's just really off-putting, and it doesn't connect. They'll say, well, God needed him more. It's God's way. Most people who grieve question their faith, whatever their religion or faith is. They spend years questioning that. So it's not a safe bet. Or the biggest thing, the one takeaway, because this happens in all of us, because we're nervous and we don't know what to say and we want to relate, is we do comparative suffering. And, when my mom lost her dad, or my aunt did this, mine's bigger than yours. And it's like every person's grief is like a thumbprint. There might be similar secondary losses that you could share, the loss of feeling safe and the loss of finances and things like that, but everyone is unique. And so when you go into this comparing, you're losing them. And whether things are right or wrong, good or bad, as an advisor, you want to find statements that connect, engage, and continue the conversation rather than stop it.
Mm-hmm. What about saying something? This is the one that always comes to my mind, and then I get nervous about it because it's like, well, I'll say it first and I'll explain. But saying something like, well, I'm so sorry, I can't even imagine what you're going through. For some reason, that's the one that always automatically pops up in my mind. And then every time I think about it, I make myself pause and I don't actually say it because it's like you say, I can't even imagine what you're going through. And they're probably sitting there thinking to themselves, no, you're right. You can't imagine what I'm going through. Thank you for saying that. That doesn't help whatsoever.
The first part of that is I'm sorry or sorry for your loss. That's just a sentence starter. I mean, and it's been done.
Right.
That's where
well,
it's like,
that's where like most people start naturally, I think, right?
They just
so
naturally do it, the whole world. If I had a penny for everybody who says that in the world, you and I'd be on the, in a yacht in the south of France. Okay. That's just the way it is. But when somebody says, I'm sorry for your loss, the griever immediately says, that's okay. I'm fine. To soothe you. And so if you said something like, I miss John already, or I'm thinking about Cindy right now. But when you say, I can't imagine, okay, what you say, I can't imagine, kind of isn't true because you kind of can. You can only imagine what the feelings they're going through.
Oh yeah, good point.
Right?
That's all I can do is all I can do is try to imagine. Yes, yeah. Right.
So changing that saying I can't imagine to I can only imagine what you're experiencing right now. And I'm here to listen. I'm here to just be alongside you. I'm here to support you in ways other than just listening, or if you need help at the house, or if you need help with paperwork, whatever you are willing to offer is just nice.
Mm-hmm. Would you say best, ideally, we would eliminate I'm so sorry, or I'm sorry for your loss, like altogether, just like eliminate it from the, not that it's necessarily taking away, or maybe it is detrimental, but it's certainly not helping or adding in any way. So like, is the thought process to, like, do we need to be aware of when that's coming out and stop it from coming out? Is it okay to still lead in with? What do you think?
I think advisors are brilliant people, and I think we can do better than I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah,
And
I kind of think so too. I was just wondering.
Starting in with, this is extremely sad. I heard about this, and I'm sharing in your sadness. Other things, other scripting ways of saying I'm sorry. The news of your aunt passing just affected us all. It just is more personable, because I double dog dare anybody to go online and look on Facebook or wherever, and you see a death and it'll say, I'm sorry for your loss, over and over and over. And
right,
there's an etiquette in social media that, I want people to be grief literate and start showing up as humans and saying the person's name, saying what you miss about them, and offering support. And that can either be done in a card, in a phone call, in a DM, but to put it all out there, you just hear, I'm sorry, or it reminds me when my uncle died, or whatever.
It's as you're sitting here saying this, the thing keeps coming back to my mind is, without left to our own devices, we're just naturally grief illiterate. Or I guess I shouldn't say everybody is, but just like our natural way of being, our instinct of what to do and how to react in these scenarios is just instinctively not how you shouldn't do things. Is kind of what I'm getting from this at this point.
Well, it's true. And I'm we are all grief illiterate. We haven't had enough practice. There hasn't really been the how. Like, I know I'm supposed to be empathetic. I know I'm supposed to do that, but nobody's given us the words. And that's why I decided to do this. I wanted to give people some tools to actually say and write and what to know. And so that when somebody just out of the blue says, oh, my dog died, we can do better than saying, I'm sorry. I mean, when somebody had the courage to tell you that their dog died, which almost every person in the world can associate with a pet and owning a pet and maybe the loss of a pet. Mm-hmm. That is an opportunity to say, that makes me sad. What was your dog's name? And, and thank them for sharing that, and say, I bet you're going to really miss that. What were some favorite things that you did with your dog? But our instinct is to say, I'm sorry. Will you get a new dog?
Yeah, right. Oh, man. Yeah, that's exactly right. Like, so you think you'll get another one? Like, as if it's just some sort of object with no meaning. Yeah.
Because we are culturally conditioned to cheer people up who are sad.
Yeah.
And grief can't be cheered away. Okay? It needs to be acknowledged, revered, and it needs to be in a way that they feel like you saw them. You saw their pain. You saw their loss. And people who are in grief make others uncomfortable. Okay, I know how to clear a room, Brendan. If I want to get out of a social situation real quick, all I've got to say is I'm a widow, and they scram. It's like a junior high dance with everybody on the side of the wall.
Yeah, right.
Because I make people uncomfortable because we immediately instinctively go inward and we think, wow, what if this happened to me? What if this happened to my family? What if, and so we don't want to deal with it. And that's a normal response. And if we had the tools of communication and grief literacy, we would know what to do and say in that instance. And people who grieve, social isolation is a huge part of that. Is, not only did they lose a spouse or a child, whatever, but now they're socially isolated. They don't get invited places because we make people awkward, right? I mean, if you knew somebody who just had a miscarriage, would you invite them to the baby shower next week? Right?
Right, yeah.
Right?
No, that's exactly right, yeah.
And the answer is yes, you invite them.
You still do.
And yes, you send a special note that this might be sensitive, but we'd love to see you. You deep down, to do the right thing. You just can't put it into words. Because people mean well. They care about one another. And we just have to pause and learn how to show up in empathy and compassion.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it makes me think about, we had a really good friend who lost her husband at age 28. Tragic accident. She went on to write a book about it. It's called Lemons on Friday. It's awesome if anybody wants to check it out.
I want to read it.
She's a great writer. And anyway, so like for us, the hardest part, so for years and years, when we would get together, we would hang out as couples, right? So like me and my wife, and then there would be like two other couples, and then Maddie and her husband, Ben, who passed. And that was one of the hardest things, was like we still wanted to hang out as couples because that's what we were so used to. But we were like, do we invite Maddie, or will that be too like hard for her? Right? Like, it's not that we didn't want her there, but it's like, how do we navigate this new dynamic where we still want to hang out as couples? Do we invite her? We went on a trip to New York, and it's like we invited her, but even then, like the whole time, you're just kind of thinking like, is this awkward for her because she's the single one and she's just being reminded of what it used to be like? So I mean, I guess I don't even know what I'm saying as I say that, other than when you gave that example. It's just, I mean, it's so true. You sit there and you're like, you don't at that time, in the moment at the time, I remember thinking like, this is so unfair to her, right? Like, what, we can't isolate her, but we're like dancing around like, how does she feel? Would she want to go? I don't even really know exactly what I'm saying with that. It just really hit home as you were pointing that out.
No, thank you for sharing about, Ben and Maddie, and what a sad story to young life and tragic. And I think a lot of people can relate to that when something happens, or if it's a divorce or a death or whatever. Do we include them? And normally we're just like, oh, I don't want them to feel uncomfortable, and this, and I don't want them to be sad.
Right.
How about we invite them because we love them and let them decide?
Which, like you said deep down, we know what to do. Like, we know how to navigate these things. So as you say it out loud, I'm like, yeah, well, of course, that makes the most sense. Mm-hmm. It's just, for some reason, it's like we have this block in there somewhere that's like, we know what to do, but for some reason, we don't always do it, kind of thing.
Well, this is hard stuff. I mean, this is the unhappy hour, Brandon. It's not, Yeah. I'm reminded of a story when I was speaking at the Shift conference, and I was like right at 4:15, and the happy hour was setting up out in the lawn at 5, and so you could hear all of it. And I'm like, okay, this is happy hour will be in a minute, but this is the unhappy hour. So, buckle up, because we're going there today.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, you mentioned this a little bit ago, but I want to come back to it. You talked about how after John died, that you had the meeting with your advisor. And I know you've written about it a little bit on your blog. Can you take us back to that point in time and sort of take us through that meeting, how it went, what were you feeling and experiencing, what John did well, did that sort of thing, just to give us a little perspective on, as a widow, recently widowed, what was that meeting like?
So that meeting, which I call a brand new discovery meeting, because that girl is no longer the same. It's just, you're a brand new person at that point. But what people don't understand is that this is an advisor who we knew a long time. We both had strong relationships with him. And I pulled up to the office parking lot, and it was the hardest thing, Brendan, to get out of my car. I had that fight or flight, like, I don't want to go up there. Because as soon as I go up there and I have to face the money side of this, it becomes real. And it's not about the death. The money side makes this death reality. And the money represented the ultimate cost, my husband's life. And, he was well planned. We had money. We had life insurance. We did all the right things. But I didn't want that money. In fact, I spent like a crazy person because of what it represented. I'm like, I don't want it. I hate it. I don't want, you avoid it. And so when I finally got the courage to go up those stairs and I went to his office, it was a very hard conversation. But you know what? We talked about John. We talked about, memories of John. He made it a place that I could always talk about John. And he said things like, I know you and John made these plans, and we don't have to decide everything today. In fact, we have to do very little today. But he just opened that door. And he got out behind his office desk and he had a conversation with me, and I felt heard. I felt, like I could call at any time if I needed anything, if I had a question. Because I was the traditional, I didn't care about the financial side of stuff. I let John do everything.
Yeah.
And in hindsight, I preach now to my daughters. I'm like, you get involved, But I was that person. He loved doing it. I was busy. I trusted him.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
honestly, Brendan, I came into this at such a disadvantage because of that. Because I had no clue about money, about long-term wealth, I didn't have a clue, and I didn't even know what to ask. And I was embarrassed to come clean that I didn't know these things.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting women to the table is a prime thing that I'm all about, and ways to get women to the table early and often, because you will have the longest client relationship with a woman. Most likely they'll be a widow at some point. But this advisor didn't make it about the money the first time. He made it about our life, acknowledging this massive event, creating a space where I felt comfortable to talk about John. He knows my kids. He still knows all my kids. It's been 20 years. I've raised 5 kids. And, and I'll get a text and he'll be like, oh, I didn't know Jesse was living in San Diego now. And that's my youngest son, who now is a pilot also, like
Cool.
my husband, which is huge.
Yeah.
So those are some key things that he did and continued to do, because we had a relationship already built. That's the key.
Okay, you said something that just struck me, and I've never thought about it like this before. So I want to go back and explore it for a second. But correct me if I'm wrong, if I heard it wrong. But it sounded like what you said was, when you're in the car, you didn't want to get out. You struggled to get out because you had to face the ultimate cost. But the way that you said it almost sounded like you were going to have to face the reality of it in a way that you hadn't up to that point. And I guess in my mind, as I'm thinking through it, like, I haven't thought about it. Like, I guess I would have thought that, like, well, when you're at the funeral, that's what makes it real, when you have to face reality. Or as you're filling out certain paperwork, that's what makes it real. That's the reality. But it sounds like you're saying that maybe those were real, but like those were moments that made it real too. But like this meeting, this talking about the money was what's the word I'm looking for? Milestone. No, not milestone moment, but just like another marker of the realness of the situation. And I've never even considered it that way.
It is. You go through all of this stuff. You've got all the family in town. You're doing the funeral, all of this, the food, the casseroles, everything. And then everybody leaves. And the kids go back to school. And I'm still paying the bills and this and that. And, my dad came and helped me do everything. But when I had to face the fact that financially I had to handle this stuff, and I knew nothing about it, the reality set in. Like, oh my gosh, I don't have a clue what to do with this money. I don't know how much I'll need. I am 39 years old, and it's like the financial puzzle, I don't even know what that looks like. It's like getting the puzzle box that's blank, and you don't even know the picture of the puzzle that you're building. And you're just in this state of, I don't even know what to do, where to start, who to ask. And when I have to go see my advisor, I got to face facts. And it's tough.
Facts that you probably know that you need to face, but you sort of avoid facing because it's too strong. The emotions are too strong, and that almost like forces you to face it. You don't have a choice anymore at that point.
You don't have a choice. Where I could have my little grief spiral and go have, go sit in the corner and bawl for days, and nobody would know. I tell people this, that I've always been very confident leader, teacher, athletic coach. And that year of John's death, I spent a year in bed. I would get up, I would take the kids to school, I'd come back, go to bed, set an alarm, and go pick up my kids for over a year, and nobody knew. I was very good at faking that. But when I had to deal with the finances, I couldn't fake that stuff anymore.
Yeah, you couldn't. You had to get out of bed.
I had to get out of bed. Yeah. You just don't have a choice when it comes to money. And a lot of couples who are listening to your podcast need to get both parties to the table early and often.
Mm-hmm. All right, I'm going to go full disclosure here for a second. Honesty hour. This is embarrassing, but it needs to be said. I think I've told this on here one time before, and even as I was saying it, I was like, gosh, this is so bad. My second year as an advisor, I get a call from Helen. She's like, hey, Brendan, Gary's in the hospital. He's not doing very well. And he had health issues, but I think he was 63, she's 58. Best client by all the measures that you can think of. Assets, neediness, friendly, like love hanging out with him, blah, blah, blah. And I'm sitting there like, okay, all right, he'll bounce back. I didn't say this, by the way, but I was like, he'll bounce back. He always does. I think it was like 2 days later, she called and she was crying. It was a Saturday morning, so I was like at home with my kids. She called crying and said, Brendan, Gary's he's gone. He died. And I remember in that moment being like, whoa, first of all, I knew this was supposed to happen at some point in my career, but why 2 years in, first of all? Like, please, no. But I think it may have been one of the most transformative, beneficial experiences that I've had in a long time in this industry, in this profession, because of what happened next. So I don't remember how long it was in between, maybe like a week or 2 weeks later. Like, we had been in touch, but she's like, hey, I need you to come over. Like, we need to meet, right? So, and I'm like thinking, I'm going over there, I'm thinking about like, okay, like it's, she's emotional. Like, how can I best approach this? I had heard things before from our friend Maddie and asked her a little bit. And she was like, don't avoid talking about him. Use his name. Recall experiences and things that you loved about Gary. So I did that. But then the next thing I did, like after that, was start kind of breaking it into the whole, like, okay, so here's what we need to be doing from like the estate planning, financial planning standpoint. And I've been intentional about just trying to keep it really simple and clear and go, all right, here are the things that we need to do. And I'll never forget this. And I'm like thinking I'm doing a good job, like being delicate and making it clear, not overwhelming her. And she was like, Brendan, hang on. Do I need to go back to work? And I'm sitting there the whole time thinking to myself, like thinking I've got this under control. I'm helping her, painting this picture of what to do. And the only thing that she could think about, or well, not the only thing, but one of her main questions on her mind was, do I have to go back to work because of what just happened? Because I'm not fully aware of the entire situation. And man, did I feel humbled in that moment going, I just made that about me. And she just needed to know, like, basically at that point, just wanted to know the answer to one question and needed to be reassured that, like, hey, we can figure this out to where you don't need to go start applying for jobs. And it was just the ultimate teaching moment of, in that meeting, the last thing that she really needed, or probably anybody needs, is, but tell me if I'm wrong or if you feel otherwise, is to focus on money and the finances. And it sounds like that's what your advisor did well, was just, if nothing else, and I don't know how he or she knew to do this so well, so tip of the cap to them. But you said it, the focus was on John and talking about John. I think I've even seen you say, like, that meeting should probably be just like 90% talking about John or the memories. But so anyways, as I was saying that, what thoughts
Well,
came to mind in terms of, Brendan, here are all the things you did wrong and what you could have done better?
First of all, we've all done stuff and said stuff and going, gosh, that went well. There was an air ball. We've all done stuff. And
Yeah.
so and for you to be faced with, Helen calling you about Gary and it's your second year of advising, this is big stuff. And why wouldn't you think, well, I'm a financial advisor. They came to me and I'm going to make sure they feel confident. And so you come to it from the right heart.
Sure,
You
right.
know?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, but yes, and I can still picture that mental checklist that I had of financial planning items that needed to be addressed. But yes, that's a great point. It comes from the right place, so that's an important thing to point out.
It does, and I'm a teacher, so I always think of a lesson plan. And I think if I were to write a lesson plan for that first meeting, there would be some objectives of, you know, what my overall goal is, questions to ask, how to engage them to keep talking, and whether they have questions for me right off the bat. That's one thing, or whether they want to write down questions. But I would be thinking of all the financial things that could probably be something I give for homework or send with them or email them and say, I'm going to send you a list of 3 things that I want you to think about, until our next meeting. So, and really creating that meeting of just conversation, getting to know them more, and getting to know their fears. She was really worried about, do I have to go back to work? Which I think a lot of people can relate to. And one of the biggest things that widows worry about right up front is, my house. Can I stay in my house? I don't want to stay in my house, and that housing decision, and I got to decide right now, and all of those things. And to really, as an advisor, have that first lesson plan all about them, but then have opportunities to give them the information they need, either with them, email, another way, and be in a situation where you're there to answer all the questions whenever they come, whenever they come with it. I mean, I encourage advisors to tell clients, I just want you to have a brainstorm sheet somewhere in your kitchen. When you think of something, write it down. When you think of something else, write it down. And then when we meet, we're going to prioritize what needs to be now, next, and later. Because a lot of people who grieve think, I got to get it all done now because I want to check it off and be over with it. But
Right.
As a good advisor, that premature decisions are not good decisions. And there's very few decisions that have to be made in that first month or two. And to really help pace this person out and know that, hey, we're a team here, you and I, we're going to do this together. Just reassurance. And because you're an advisor, so we give advice. There's a problem, so we fix it. And that's where we have to back off and say, there's a problem. It's not a problem, it's a reality, and it's grief, and it's loss. And now I have a system in place of how to go there.
I really like the idea of the brainstorming sheet of some sort, where you're going to have these things pop into your head. They may not be immediate. Just put them somewhere. Get them out of your mind. Jot them down. Send them to me. Just email me every time it comes up. Whatever it is, just don't stress about it. Put them somewhere else. I really like that idea.
It really empowers people to put their stuff down on paper, and then it's not you doing all the work for them. Because yes, we want their help, but we also want to empower them.
Yeah, great.
And it also gives an opportunity of there's nothing too big or small. If you're just thinking, gosh, do I have to do something, with the safe to deposit box? I don't know. I don't even know where the key is. That might be a random thing that they're thinking about, and that goes on that list.
Did you have a list like this?
I had a ton of things to do, and I didn't want to do them. And fortunately, I had, a great help with my advisor, but I had, my family, my parents just basically came in and helped me do everything, moved in with me for a few months. But just all of the things that you just can't imagine, you call to get a credit card, the name off the credit card, just, you don't have just one call. You have like 80 calls. And you call and then you're transferred to somebody new and you tell the story again and you're transferred to somebody new. And by the end of being transferred the fourth time, you're almost in tears and you're so blunt. You're like, husband died, who do I talk to? I mean, it's somebody told me who was a widow. She told me this when this happened. She said, you'll only be able to make one call a day. So manage that expectation. And I didn't believe her. I thought, me, I'm super competitive. I can do more.
Right.
She was spot on.
It makes me think about when my granddad passed and my grandmom. We thought we were going to lose her doing all of this paperwork and everything. Not literally, right? But like we thought she was going to go crazy and we were going to lose her. Not actually lose her, but like at one point we joked like she's going next because she's filling all of this paperwork. She's not letting herself rest. She's trying to get it all done. She's just going. I know you said for you it was hard to do anything. And I guess I'm just thinking I wonder if that's like two different ways to deal with the emotions, right? Like on one hand, somebody may say, hey, I feel best dealing with these strong emotions by doing. And so I'm just going to go and I'm going to do. And that's not healthy either. You're just avoiding, by the way, no judgment. But like if we just zoom out and look at it realistically, you're avoiding what's going on. Or the other route is like you're so overwhelmed with the emotions that you just don't do anything. Well, first, I guess maybe the first question is, does that sound right? If we're thinking through, like, if we have a client that's like they're not doing something or they're like going 100 miles an hour, is that a fair way to think about it?
It's a very fair way to think about it. And a lot of it's, if you're a get things done and that's your learning style and you need checklists, well, then give them 5 things on the checklist for the first month. Give them a checklist. Make them, But if they're not doing anything and they're dragging their feet and they need a little more reason to do it, then you're going to preface that conversation a little bit differently. And you're going to say, okay, this is the window to do these 3 things. And do you want me to check in with you through email or text or help to see if you need any help or whatever, And I mean, my whole program, I didn't know a name to name it, but I knew the acronym. And I called it PACE because you have to pace your client. And you have to pace it in order that they don't rush through and make financial mistakes, or they wait too long and don't get the proper information, and then it's too late. And so, there's an art to this, and it's not a one size fits all. It's every person is different. Grief is unique, and somebody's way of doing things, you would organize a garage completely different than I would organize a garage.
Well, I just wouldn't organize a garage, but yes, that's still true, right? Yeah. If it was up to me, it would probably never get organized, but fortunately it's not up to me. But right. So sorry, but you're right. I mean, it's different, just like grief is different.
Yes.
Like a thumbprint.
Yes. Amen.
Are we supposed to avoid big decision making for a certain period of time, like in an emotional state? Like, is that a good rule of thumb?
Yes, it's a very good rule of thumb. And, theoretically, people who grieve have this grief fog, brain fog, where cognitively, forgetfulness, putting things together, connecting the dots, it's a real thing. And many grievers, there's a recent study that it lasts well beyond 2 years. So you're asking me to do all these things with money, and I'm like, I don't remember, I left my keys on the top of my car, I left, whatever. And very few decisions, important decisions, need to be made that first year. Get the cash flow, know where that's coming, get the bills paid, okay? But they want to make fast decisions, get them over with. Their families on them, like, you got to sell the house, mom, you got to downsize, this and that. Or else the widow or widower is like, I don't feel safe in this house. This is where my husband died. I don't want to be there anymore. Or I want to hang on to it because this is where my children grew up, and maybe my children, and they're very focused on that. But that is like a 6 to 9 month, let's get more information on the market, on maybe, refinancing, on all of these things. And maybe in a year, you decide. I mean, you see so many people redecorate their house that first year.
Okay.
Remodel their house. They fall prey to a lot of contractors taking advantage of them, people taking advantage of them because they know they're alone. They know they've never done this. I mean,
that infuriates me. I mean, I shouldn't be surprised.
Oh, yeah.
That's just unbelievable.
You can't imagine what it's like. Well, you can imagine.
Yeah, right. Or I can only imagine.
You can only imagine. I was afraid to have somebody like a plumber come over to my house and fix toilets because I didn't want them to know that I'm alone with kids. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I'm like, they're like, well, is your husband here? I'm like, he's out in the back. I can't call him right now. And because you don't want to know, and if you could have advisors, like I would just call my advisor, Stuart, and say, who do you know that could fix a plumber? Who do you know in this town that could do this? I got to buy a car. I've never bought a car before. I mean, I went there by myself. I didn't know what to do. I overpaid. I got the extended warranty. They saw me walking on the lot. I mean, that's the reality of, suddenly solo people, and specifically suddenly solo women.
Again, that just makes me so mad. But there's also people listening right now who are big warranty believers that are like, no, don't worry. You did not get sold something you didn't need. Warranties are the greatest thing ever. Trust me. Every time I talk about warranties in any social public forum, you get both sides of the coin. Some people are like, oh, my gosh, warranties have saved that. It's not important for right now. Just wanted you to know there's a good chance that, you got people on your side that would say that's not the case.
Okay, good. In all fairness, the color of the car was called cashmere, and I'm like, sold. That's all that sold me.
Because
of the color of the car. I said, well, what color is that? Is it white or is it tan? And he's looking on it, and he's like, it says cashmere. And I'm like, done. We're sold. Wrap it up.
Because of the name of the color?
That's why I bought it, yes. So I overpaid. I mean...
So if it had been white gold, you probably wouldn't have been...
Yeah, I don't think so. So,
Does that have something to do with grief? Like, are you saying like did it have to do with what you were going through at the time? Or you've just always been a lover of cashmere?
Oh, I love cashmere.
Okay.
I love cashmere. I think my point is I had no business being on a car lot spending money that I had no clue if I had it or I didn't have it, because it was right after John's death.
Okay.
And I got taken at the car lot, and it was a mistake, and it was a spending mistake.
If you had a client, if we have a client, I have a client that was at this place where we're saying, you probably need to take a little bit more time to make a big decision about whether to leave this house, downsize, buy a car. Is there a safe and yet effective way to communicate that message without just telling them no, or without saying, hey, don't do this right now? this now's not the right time. You're in an emotional state. Like that's the message that you're trying to get across. Is there a better way to say that?
At that point, yes, there is. um, I think when they come in and they just like, you know what, I want to sell the house and I want to do it now. I just can't be there, blah, 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 blah. You just listen. And then you say, you know, have you taken any thoughts of where you might want to go? You know, where would you go from here? Okay. And you're asking more questions. Do you want to stay in this town? Do you want to stay in this neighborhood? Asking more questions and saying, you know, is that next house, do you want to be bigger or smaller? How much money? You know, are you aware of how much you can afford? And so you're just helping them become curious about, maybe I'm not quite ready. Maybe I don't know. And then you're saying, you know, I have a couple great realtors if you want me to have them come out and give you, you know, an idea of the process, or maybe, you know, I don't know, do you just want to be out of the house? Do you want to refinance the house? Do you want it? And you're just trying to find why they're so focused on this, and guide them of saying, you know, would you be comfortable with me kind of pricing out how it would affect your long-term finances if you sold now versus waited a year? So you're just giving them options. And everybody does, I mean, nobody likes to be told what to do, but I love to have choices, right? You know, help paint the picture, give them some options, and say, I'm happy to do this. And so then you can have all the facts in front of you, and then you can make the best decision. And really, that's my job, to help support you.
Right. It's what I always say is like the new relationship dynamic in advice is not the advice giver, but like the guide and the thinking partner. And
Yes.
at the most basic, at the most core level, you're essentially like helping them go from a place where they're thinking emotionally in the emotional part of the brain and asking questions to try to get them to think more intentionally, right? Just guiding them through going, I know you think you want to do this, but you're not saying this, but it's like, but you're in an emotional state. Let's get really clear, ask some questions around to get you to this place of like, do I really want to do this? To be more intentional and deliberate in the decision making. But to do that, you're a thinking partner, asking them the questions that they need to be thinking to get to the place where they can make the best decision.
Yeah, I agree. And I think as an advisor, you have an opportunity to, they're at A, and they can't picture where B would be, okay? Where it would be like, they're in this house and they know they want out of it, but they don't know where that next house is. And maybe you can answer some questions, paint the picture of their options, and then put it to some dollar amounts of how it would affect them down the road, because they're not seeing it right now.
Yeah, you're putting some clarity in the picture. Yeah. You said with your teaching background, you would think through, what's the goal of this first meeting when I get together with somebody? What are some of the questions that I want to ask? Come prepared. What would you say, is there a goal that we should have? Like, is there maybe not generic, but like what would you consider to be a good goal for that meeting?
I mean, I always think, great teachers and great advisors are backward planners. So at the end of this time, what would I want? Okay. And I would want when this person leaves my office, to have them know that this is a safe space, that they can always, this is a space where we can always talk about who has died, that you are a resource for them for any and all questions, recommendations, anything that they need. And you would like to communicate with them in their desired mode of communication. And so now we've opened up the lines of communication. This person would prefer texting. They know they're safe. They know there's no such thing as a dumb question. And they've left feeling heard, respected, and protected.
I'm going back to listen to this episode just so I can like take notes on that whole thing again and write it down. I think that's so good. There's that stat out there that it's like something like 80% of widows leave their current advisor. What's the number? Do you know off the top of your head?
It is over 80.
Over
80. 80% of widows leave their advisor within the first year.
Within the first year, okay.
Yeah.
Now you were one of the other. You were on the other side, the 20%.
No, yeah, I stayed. And so
Do we think that stat's true? Let me ask you that real quick if you don't mind. Okay.
I do. I mean, I'm in a ton of widows groups.
Right. That's why I wanted to ask. Yeah.
Yes, and most people left their advisor, and so I think, wow, what an opportunity for advisors and financial companies to learn the skills to retain them, because it had nothing to do with finances. The number one reason they leave is because they cannot communicate with empathy. That's the number one thing.
Wow.
I mean, then followed by integrity, then followed by listening skills, then followed by financial ability. So, I mean, the finances were fourth in this study. And so when you think about it, you think, well, if they're leaving, we don't want them to leave, so we're going to retain them. But if they leave, where are they going? Why don't we be companies that attract people going through loss and grief? Brand compassion as a company, knowing that we're going to support you not only in good times, but in bad times, because you're building trust with clients through consistent things in good times and planning. But you solidify trust in the bad stuff. When you can show up consistently, when a client has cancer, when they have to put their father in a long-term care facility for cognitive delay, and you've shown up, you have clients for life, and you have their families and referrals forever. I don't know why you're not front-loading this grief issue.
Yeah, I thought about this. I meant to mention it, and I thought about it like beforehand, which is, yes, this is hard. It's not easy to do. You can learn the skills, but if we reframe it for a second, like, what an opportunity. In fact, probably very few opportunities carry the magnitude that meeting somebody in this place offers, right? I mean, as I'm thinking about it aloud, it's like, yeah, if you can do it right, it may be the most beneficial thing, the most helpful thing, the most rewarding thing you can do for the relationship.
Absolutely. I mean, when I told you my program is called PACE,
Yeah, what did that stand for, by the way? Okay, yeah, you're going to tell us. Go ahead, yeah.
P is preparation. That means before. Action steps, communication, and empowerment. And the preparation, that is the one thing you have control over. If you are meeting with clients, no matter what age, they need to know that you have resources for different types of loss. Maybe you have resources for divorce or caregiving or all of these other types of losses, and they know you have it. And maybe there's a newsletter that says, I'm not sure if you're aware, but 70% of sandwich generation people are caregiving a parent and working. Here's a great resource if this is you. And then it's like we've had the fire drill. We've had the fire drill in good times, and they know you're about that. So then when the actual fire happens, the bad times, and you're on the front lines, you're prepared. You know exactly the action steps you're supposed to take. You know, when you make the call or they call you, you know what to say, you know what to write. You have this all planned out. I mean, we know how this movie ends for all of us. And you are planners, backward planners, and the end is death. So why are we not having these conversations in good times, so you become known as the advisor, the go-to person in good and bad times?
Now, is the idea there that you're sort of in a way planting the seed that this is something that you can do and can help them navigate through, so that when it comes up, it registers and they're like, hey, I know our advisor mentioned this to us. This is something that he or she can take us through. Is it sort of like a seed planting idea?
Yes, you plant seeds with clients, and you put testimonials out there of, when a client, a new widow, writes you something of appreciation, you say, I helped people in this. Just the mere fact of saying, I've had grief literacy training and I help people throughout life, because when we don't get both sides of the story, we only get the money side about buying the vacation home and sending the kids to college, but we don't get all of the sad stuff that happens in our life. We don't trust people. And so you've got to show people and teach your clients that I also do this because I want to be your client for life. And there's two types of clients. One that is experiencing grief and one that knows somebody who's experiencing grief.
That kind of, when you think about it that way. Oh, the other thing I thought about as you said that was clients who are experiencing grief, those who know somebody that's experiencing grief. But I'm spitballing this here, by the way, so feel free to be like, Brendan, no, that's insane. But I kind of wonder if you could also say, like, there are clients who are about to or will at some point experience, like, none of us is a grief immune, right? Like, it's something that every client will go through, which comes back to something I think is really important to point out or highlight, and maybe could have or should have done it earlier. I should have done it earlier. Is there's different types of grief, and sometimes there's grief that we don't even think about, right? Like, yes, there is the loss of a loved one and widowhood, and I think that's the one that we probably think of mostly, is that. But can you explain, like, what, like, because I know you've talked and written about it, but like what the different types of grief are, even like some of the ones that we don't even tend to think of sometimes?
So when we think about, one that most of us can relate to is anticipatory grief. And that's when, it happens, like, say somebody was in a car accident and they have to have some care. They don't know whether they're going to live or die. They don't know where this is going to go, but they're already experiencing grief right then. When somebody gets a diagnosis, they're already experiencing grief. People will say that they lost their person twice. First at diagnosis, second at death. Yeah. And so, when a child gets ill, you're thinking, oh, I'm sad. I'm worried about this child. They can't do these things for a while. That's anticipatory grief. If your clients are going through maybe a separation or a possible divorce, you don't think they're experiencing grief right now? It's not the final thing. It's the worry, the uncertainty, and loss can be all types of loss. You think about death is one, change is another. People in retirement,
I was
They
gonna
can
say, I think
think
that might be a big one too, right? Like grieving
retirement's
your,
huge.
yeah,
We think, oh, but you have all this money and you can do all the things and this and that. When the retiree in front of you is saying, I miss my friends. I don't feel purposeful. I have way too much time on my hands. I don't even know what to do. And we're coming in to fix it. When we really should just say, wow, you know, that must be a huge change for you. And start just letting them talk and tell what that's like, because
mm,
retirement, empty nest, you know,
yeah, yeah,
um, losing a home, moving state to state, changing jobs.
yeah.
There's all a sense of loss.
Yeah, I'll go full disclosure, honesty hour here. As I was reading some of your stuff, it sort of hit me, and I think that I experienced some grief around, and so I'll paint it around this, which is like I feel like there can be grief around different phases of your life, moving to a different phase of your life, and like honestly, as I say, it's kind of a little bit embarrassing, and I know maybe it shouldn't be, but I'm just gonna say it anyways because what the heck. But I think I experienced more grief than I expected. Or actually, I didn't know it in the moment. Looking back on it, I think I experienced grief when we sent both of our kids to school for 5 days a week because it was like the end of a certain era. And I'm getting emotional talking about it. So I'm sure that probably is grief. But like to me, it sounds crazy to say that. But I use that as an example to point out, I think even just like different phases of life where like we grieve the little kid stage and we're moving into a new phase, and we're excited about it. But things are going to be different, right? We can't wake up and have slow, casual mornings anymore. You know.
Yes.
So.
I it is loss, Brendan. Having our children at home in those sweet, tender ages, and then they start to leave us. Then they start to get more independent, and we're not needed as much, and that sweet tender time is no longer there. And you tell that to people and they're like, yeah, but then they're going to be doing this and this, and it's like, you're not hearing me. This
You're
makes me
right,
sad.
right. Yeah, exactly. Like,
Right.
oh, I get, yeah, you're right, but just wait. Like, they're gonna grow up, and you're gonna be friends with them, and you're gonna love what happens. And it's like, I know, like, I get it, I do,
Right.
but I'm not ready to go there right now.
No. And if you are grief literate, that person will say, I can understand how you would feel. I mean, it seems like you miss that.
Mm,
You don't have to, when you are talking with people who have experiencing any type of loss, like the one you're describing or anything, you don't have to have experienced that same context. Try to be in touch with the emotion. I could tell when you were telling this that there was a sense of like tender sweetness that you're uncertain is going to be there still. And so
yeah,
I'm trying
yeah.
to connect to your emotions, not the context of your loss.
And that is no, maybe not the definition, but that is empathy.
It's
Essentially,
empathy.
right? Like that is when you
Yes.
talk about okay, yeah. That's what I've kind of come to believe. You actually, I think I saw it. You said or read it somewhere that whatever you do, remember or don't convince yourself. There's the advice out there that's like put yourself in their shoes, and you said you can't put yourself in somebody else's shoes. If you try to do that, that's not going to work. That's not empathy.
Even when somebody shares with me, that they were widowed, young, with 5 children, I would just listen. And I would ask. I would never tell them that I was widowed also. Okay? I'm
Ever,
listening.
or you would listen first and
Perhaps
then
if they'd ask me later on,
okay.
if they'd ask me more and we become better friends, etc. But it's really important to let it be. Why can't they have their red carpet moment? Right? Okay, they've just experienced this massive loss. Why do I have to come in and steal the show?
Mm-hmm.
And we think that there's this hierarchy of loss. Like one loss is more important than the other. The loss that you just told me you experienced is no less important than any other loss, because the only loss that matters is your loss. And when we start comparing, like, yeah, well, my grandfather died, and he was, and somebody says, well, how old was he? Well, what does that matter? Just mean the grandfather that died at 95 versus a 40-year-old is one more than the other? Or you say, my sister died. Well, were you close? Well, what does that matter?
Yeah.
And so because our little brain, our curiosity brain, tries to quantify where on the scale of loss I need to put the importance. Because
Yeah.
okay, you told me your cat died. Well, where should that be? And again, the only loss that matters is your loss.
Your loss. Yeah.
I don't, or somebody died from a car accident versus somebody died of cancer. Is one better than the other? And I think we start to quantify, because grief, there's this inner tug of war in our brain when things are really sad. And so we immediately going into, well, I got to justify this loss. I've got to, they lived a long life. I'm really glad about that. At least they didn't have to suffer quick. All of these things, just so that I can handle this conversation.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the biggest quandaries is, how do I stay present and personable when I'm constantly thinking, oh my God, what if this happened to me or my family? Mm-hmm. And as an advisor, that is a constant tug of war.
Mm-hmm. So before we move into the rapid fire 3-pack, I do want to, for a second, at least break down, or we've already hit on a number of things you can do, but I kind of want to do a little quick, we'll call it a cheat sheet, which you may say isn't entirely fair. There needs to be more context, but just for somebody that's all right, I listen to this and have an idea of what to do, but what are some practical, really practical things I could do in addition to what we've already talked about? So you said use their name, talk about memories. Don't be afraid to talk about memories and experiences, and then talk about the person. What else comes to mind as maybe, it doesn't have to be little, but just things that we can do that are the right thing to do or helpful in times of grief and loss?
Okay. A couple more things when you're talking with people. Mirror their death terms. Not everybody is ready to say my child died. If they say my child passed away, you say passed away. Okay. And, death, died. If they don't say anything, you're going to use those current present terms. But a lot of them will say my late husband, he passed away, and you need to mirror that. Okay. I never say my late husband, because my husband was an airline pilot. You don't want to call him late. Okay.
Yeah.
Another key thing that is really helpful is to think about the important dates that might be very difficult for your client.
Oh, yeah.
If you have any parents right now that have either gone through a divorce or a loss of a parent or a loss of a child, and it's back to school time, this is a very difficult time for parents who are missing a child or missing a spouse. And just a simple card to say, I'm thinking about you. I'm thinking about your son, Devin, who you lost, and this must be a very difficult time, and I'm here for you. Can you imagine the impact that this person would feel? It's just
and it
raw.
sounds so simple. I know it's not, but the way you just said it was simple.
it's just so simple. And you think about, you know, advisors are really good at gifting and cards and Happy New Year. And, you know, a loss or a divorce or something, you know, January 1st is not that good. It's not that happy. It's one more year that I don't get to have this guy with me. It's one more year that my kids don't get him. Father's Day, you know, you, when you think of all the things that a parent, a child misses out on a parent that's lost, you think of Mother's Day, Father's Day. You think of the father-daughter dance. You think of, you know, my kids will scram when it comes to the father-daughter dance at a wedding because they can't handle it yet. And so to reach out and really think about, put on your calendar, you know, this was a year, it's been a year that this person died. Why don't you send out a card or give them a phone call or a text and say, you know what, I know today is the day that you lost Ben. I'm thinking of you. No response needed, but I'm here for you. It's
And
not that
why
hard.
not go ahead and set an annual recurring reminder with no end date, because that date's going to be, it's going to, I mean, I
Yeah.
imagine what date did John die?
He died, John. He died, John, June 3rd. And
Uh,
I'm telling you, between Father's Day, June 3rd, his birthday was in June. 4 of my kids' birthdays are in June and July. I'm telling you, June and July are just a marathon for me. And I can't wait till they're over.
Yeah. Hey, we're recording this at the beginning of August, so you did it. Well done. Props to
Yes.
you. One of the things that I think has stuck with me most through the grief that I've seen, both firsthand, but then also like with Maddie, our friend, that was more secondhand, is how often this idea comes up of like everybody's there in the beginning, and it's not very long after that. Like, everybody wants to be there, and then they go on with their lives, and you're still there, stuck. Stuck maybe not be the best word, but you're still there in it. You don't get to move on. And so I feel like even just setting yourself this annual recurring reminder, it may not feel like you may feel like I want to remember this, doesn't feel as genuine if you set a reminder, but if somebody would send you write you a card on June 3rd, or if they did it this year or next June 3rd, and say, hey, thinking about you today, I'm here for you if you ever need anything, or I'm here for you if you want to go do this, but like, just because is it 20 years?
It's 20 years.
20 years later, tell me if I'm wrong, but would that still be
Yes.
impactful?
It still matters. You know, the conversations about John and my kid's father are alive and well. We talk about who he is. You know, my kids want to know, many of my kids were younger. They want to know who he was as a man, and, you know, because they just knew him as daddy. And we keep that memory alive. And kids, I think you're doing people a real disservice if you don't allow people to talk about the person they lost. You know, because I was sent here for a reason, Brendan, and I think it was to raise 5 kids. And I couldn't have those kids without him. So what am I going to do? Leave that part of the story out? And it still feels good. I did get a text. My anniversary was that we got married was the 22nd of July. Another July.
I mean, whew.
I'm telling you. And somebody texted me and they're like, every time I see an airplane, I think of John.
Well, that's a good one.
That was it just made me happy that people haven't forgotten him.
Who was it that texted you?
It was a neighbor that we lived next to years ago.
Huh.
And
Still close with this neighbor, or?
yeah, I'm still close with her, but I haven't seen her for probably 6 months, you know.
Yeah.
I got that one, and I got one from my sister-in-law, and I'm close with her too, but I always had to recognize that, thank you for saying that, but she lost a brother too, and I think about her too.
Mm.
You know, we don't get
Mm-hmm.
to own grief just ourselves. I said goodbye to him, but he had to say goodbye to everybody.
That's a great point. I mean, that's a really good reminder. I don't know that there's going to be a good way to transition into the rapid fire 3-pack. With that, this conversation, if there is, I needed to work on it a little bit more beforehand. But before we do that, is there anything that we didn't talk about or get to or get out there that feels like it needs to be said?
I think you hit many great points, but the one point that I want anybody listening to take away is that we're not good at this, and that's okay. Embrace being a beginner and falling down and going boom, because sometimes that's fun to learn. And, you know, embrace that and learn these skills. They're so doable, and they're going to make you a better advisor, and they're going to make you a better person.
Now we can transition to the rapid fire
Yes.
3-pack, because I
Yes.
can't say anything better than that. That was well done. You get to sit back and observe a roundtable discussion, any three people talking about behavior, psychology, communication. It could have to do with money, but it doesn't have to. Who would it be?
That was a hard one for me, but I went kind of the non-money route, but I listen to a lot of leadership stuff, but I love Simon Sinek because
Yeah.
he's
Good
so
every
spot
time.
on about how humans behave.
Yep.
And Brené Brown, I mean, hello. And she talks a lot about grief, empathy, and the guilt.
Yep.
And I love John Maxwell, who is a pastor and a leadership. I learned so much from his approach to how to treat people and how to treat your people. And I think that's a big, big deal out there.
Yet again, another roundtable discussion that I would love and pay money to be a part of. That would be fascinating. You get to gift one book to everybody that's listening. What would it be?
That was a hard one too. I chose "It's Okay That You're Not Okay" by Megan Devine. And what it's about, she's a grief psychologist, and she teaches people about grief and meeting them where they are and stop trying to fix them. We're just culturally conditioned to cheer people up.
Yep,
And you got to
yep.
sit in the mud with people.
Yep.
So I learned so much from her book.
It's okay that you're not okay.
It's okay that you're not okay.
Who is the best listener in your life? And then what does that person do so well that makes them such a great listener?
So my hero is my dad. And my dad was the best listener. He was a history teacher and basketball coach. And he always met me where I was, wherever that was. I was never an awesome student. People know that I'm a college professor and they're shocked. But he would listen in a way that would acknowledge where I am, but pose questions to make me curious and to make me feel valued. And he always acted as a guide, not somebody to tell me what to do. And he just had this knack of, I don't know if it was his education. He was like a teacher and coach of the 60s and 70s, and even back then, he taught an elective course at the high school in death and dying. And he finished his career. Wow. He became a hospice volunteer. My dad was fun. He was fun, and he's a part of your life. And I miss him. I miss him so much. And he just, I mean, we had him at my wedding in a tuxedo, jumping on the trampoline, doing a backflip. I mean, this was my dad.
That's cool.
He was just the hugest man that met me where I was, and I couldn't have gotten through what I've gotten through in life without him.
I give him props for nothing else. Though maybe one of the hardest things to do as a parent is not give advice or try to tell your kids what to do and try to ask questions and guide them. So I mean, I wish that I could like go back and watch him do what he did so I could take notes for myself. That's a cool thing. All right, last one. You can take a poster on the wall of everybody that's listening around the world. What would it say?
Who needs your E-game? And E meaning empathy. Because
I like that.
There's one person today that needs your E-game. And just slow down and acknowledge them. You know, it doesn't take that much.
And don't try to put yourself in their shoes.
No. And if you can, I believe if you can look at that every morning, who needs my E-game? Someone will just show up in your path that shares something with you. That there's your shot. I'm telling you, the universe will answer, and somebody will say, hey, you'll say, how are you today? And you're like, I'm good. I had a good weekend, but we headed to my cousin's funeral. Well, there it is. There's the invite. What are you going to say? You know?
That's it.
There's
yes, amen. I'm actually sitting over here going through my day today, like replaying my day, going, who did I miss? Who did I miss? Where was my opportunity? But
yeah.
Kathi, first of all, thank you so much for opening up, sharing your story, and hopefully impacting conversations all over the world. Second thing, if anybody wants to know more, wants to join your fan club, where should they go? What should they do?
They should go to kathybalasek.com. Everything is there that we've talked about, or they can get a hold of me through there and continue this conversation.
Awesome. It's time to go work on my E-game. Thanks,
Absolutely.
Kathi.
Thank you so much, Brendan. This has been an absolute joy, and I appreciate your voice in this world, and so privileged to know you.
Well, thank you. The feeling's mutual, and I'm happy that I can go back to that advisor now and say we now have an episode on grief and much more, but especially on grief. So thanks again, Kathi.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Brendan again. First of all, thank you for listening. Second of all, if you listen and you're thinking to yourself, I like this, but I want to dive deeper, I want more ideas and insights on how to apply this day in and day out, there's two things you can do. First and foremost, you can subscribe to my monthly newsletter that I write called The Wired Advisor. Every month, there'll be one article and then 5 resources that I've found from around the internet and the industry, articles, podcasts, videos, social links, on the best ideas and insights to apply the human side in your practice, your process, and your conversations. If you want to sign up for that, go to www.rfgadvisory.com/newsletter-subscription. That's www.rfgadvisory.com/newsletter-subscription. That's where you're going to get the best ideas and insights. But the other option is to go find me on LinkedIn. So go to LinkedIn, search Brendan Fraser, and I post pretty much every day on ideas, tips, and insights for you to be able to master the human side of money.
Content here is for illustrative purposes and general information only. It is not legal, tax, or individualized financial advice, nor is it a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold any specific security or engage in any specific trading strategy. Information here may be provided in part by third-party sources. These sources are generally deemed to be reliable. However, neither our guest nor RFG Advisory guarantee the accuracy of third-party sources. The views expressed here are those of our guest. They do not necessarily represent those of RFG Advisory, its employees, or its clients. This commentary should not be regarded as a description of advisory services provided by RFG Advisory or performance returns of any client. The views reflected in the commentary are subject to change at any time without notice. Securities offered by registered representatives of Private Client Services, member FINRA SIPC. Advisory services offered by investment advisory representatives of RFG Advisory, LLC, RFG Advisory or RFG, a registered investment advisor. Private Client Services and RFG Advisory are unaffiliated entities. Advisory services are only offered to clients or prospective clients where RFG Advisory and its representatives are properly licensed or exempt from licensure. No advisory services may be rendered by RFG Advisory unless a client agreement is in place. RFG Advisory is an SEC-registered investment advisor. SEC registration does not constitute an endorsement of RFG by the Commission, nor does it indicate that RFG or any associated investment advisory representative has attained a particular level of skill or ability.